Welcome everyone to this future-proof container terminal episode. Today we got a really interesting guest, Charley Rattan, and I will describe why interesting, because Charley had been in the industry of the renewable energies for more than 25 years, different roles as a project manager, consultant, especially on big energy companies, and especially these days that we're hearing more and more about eco-efficiency, energy transition, how can we improve and reduce our global CO2 footprint. It will be great to hear more from Charley. So Charley, welcome to the virtual stage.
That's very kind of you, Christopher. Great to be here and welcome listeners.
Great. So Charley, the plan for today is that I have been putting together some of the most asked questions, and I would like to go through them, and feel free to share your thoughts. So if that is okay for you, let's go for it.
Yeah.
So Charley, before starting the hardcore question here, could you share a little bit more about who is Charley?
Yeah, I suppose of relevance to today's discussion, I was with Shell for many years, just up the road, obviously based in The Hague. I used to come across to Leidschendam and other Dutch towns quite frequently. Got involved with some of the companies in the supply chain, companies such as Vopak and a lot of Rotterdam interests. I tried to get into the Shell Renewables and hydrogen, as was then in 2005, just as Shell was sadly pulling away a little bit. But I kept that momentum going. We ended up starting in onshore wind, moved across to offshore wind with a big German company, E.ON. Learned a lot, became a project manager for major offshore wind farms. Always been interested in innovation, always been interested in how we can look ahead rather than backwards, how wind and other technologies could work together, wind and batteries, wind and sunlight, and latterly wind and hydrogen. We always knew that it was a potential. Shell knew as far back as 2005, but the sums didn't really add up. Electrolysis was very expensive, wind was very expensive, and it's only really now, with the cost trajectories really starting to show dramatic and sustained falls, that the hard-bitten world of investment is now coming in behind the two sectors. It's been a hard slog. The grey hairs on my head perhaps reflect that. It's not been easy, but we've made success. And now perhaps the investment community is starting to say, hey, let's have a look at this. We've got a net zero agenda, COP26, children on the streets. Let's see whether there's something that can make the energy transition happen and go full circle. People like Shell are coming back in a big way as well.
Yeah, quite interesting. And, we are hearing every day, at least it's quite positive, many countries are taking at least some of them baby steps, some others are already walking. But indeed. Yeah, we've got new entrants to the market coming through all the time. I do quite a lot of training on offshore wind and offshore wind hydrogen, floating wind. And that gives me a bit of a heads up to which countries are coming through. And certainly I've done training for companies such as the Philippines, Vietnam, Australia, and now Colombia is showing interest. Latin America is showing interest. And I suppose the one benefit for them is that they can take our 20 years of learning and choose the best bits and say, hey, we're going to come right in at the cutting edge. You've de-risked it. We know it works now. It's not going to fall to pieces. It will deliver. And we want the best of it. So they want to go straight to the front of the queue and say, we don't want 10, 15-year-old kit. We want what's best, what's large, and we want to think on a big scale. You mentioned the giga projects and mega projects earlier on. And that's what many of the new offshore wind roadmaps and strategies are looking for, to go to big scale deployment very, very quickly. That's great. And Charley, before jumping into the different renewals here, I would like to ask you one question, and I always like to ask this one. So how would you describe climate change in one word?
Pressing.
Okay, and can you share why?
Well, it's the issue of our times. I know there's other issues at the moment galvanising people, and rightly so. But behind some of the shorter term issues, which hopefully will be resolved very quickly in the next year and 18 months. I'm talking about wars in Ukraine, and prior to that, the global pandemic, which were massive in their own right. But behind of them sits the ticking clock, doesn't it? The climate change agenda, the climate crisis. Every year there's a kind of World Resource Day showing how much of our resources of the planet we're using up, and that date is moving forward every year. It started right at the end of the year, and every year it moves forward because the planet is finite. So it's absolutely pressing.
Yeah, fully agree with you. And jumping into the first question here, Charlie, could you start sharing some insights about the hydrogen solution and wind power solution we are currently
Yeah, you're dead right. Hydrogen, it's been around a long time in various forms, a couple of 100 years. We've had it in the UK gas grid until 1974. And it was written out really of the story because we wanted to promote natural gas, which has done pretty well in the UK. When you combine it, and sometimes people from a nuclear background look and say it's not the most efficient. They're looking at just pure kind of figures. There's much more to a business case than just figures at times, and there is a good synergy between certainly offshore wind. Wind is unusual that it generates 24/7. Not all renewables do that, so it's constantly generating whether people need it or not. And so there's a bit of an art in offshore renewables to align the grid requirement, the electrical grid requirement, with the production, the size of the project, the energy needs using in real time. It's more or less the definition of electricity. A few batteries, yes, but in most of the time it needs using in real time. So hydrogen offers a number of potential synergies. It offers what you might call the shedding, when you don't have the demand. You can store it, you can store the electricity as a molecule, as a gas, as a liquid, a paste, even solid, which is very, very versatile, and you can get monetized for that, and you can increase the business case because of that. You can avoid real pitfalls with the electrical grid. I know there have been surveys done. The North Sea is a very scary place to develop in certain respects. Oil and gas people do it, but it's hard. And it's doubly hard to put an electrical network in there. So you might be able to obviate some of that by saying, well, let's not put electrical cables in. Let's use pipelines. Let's use some kind of oil and gas existing infrastructure. Let's see whether we can use the overspill, the shortfalls in grid, the undoubted capacity of the North Sea. Let's maximize that, and let's convert the electrical energy from the electron to the molecule, which I think is the real game changer here, which means it can be stored. And when it stores, it doesn't degrade. So if you put 100 in a year's time, you can take 100 out. Somebody like my mother turning a gas fire on, currently methane, if that transitions across to injected hydrogen and ultimately 100% hydrogen, she'll be delighted that she can keep warm during the long winter months in the UK. So it's a real potential game changer. It's not the most efficient. You do put more electricity in than ever you get out through electrolysis, and people look at that askance. But from a business point of view, we do that even in hydropower. I used to work for Scottish Hydro. The hydro stations already do that, so it's not unknown in the world of utilities, of electrical charging. I suppose one other advantage of hydrogen is that it integrates well with wind, which is scaling. Offshore wind is scaled. Here in the UK, we've got 11 gigawatts now operational. It's no longer theoretical, so it's operational, and ports are benefiting. You go to the town of Grimsby, which has been transformed through hosting offshore wind. You go to Barrow, you go to other towns and cities on the ports in the UK, and it's been transformational. So you've got a real opportunity to invest in your infrastructure, to bring it up to date, and with hydrogen to take it to another level. No longer be constrained by the electrical grid, but have another chance. It might call the gas grid. It might be a methane repurposed grid. It might be oil and gas infrastructure. It might be some new, all of those. So there's a real opportunity there. That's not to say it's all going to happen, but I think there is enough impetus now, certainly from places like Rotterdam, Bremen, Hamburg, east of England, Hull, you've got impetus, and some of these schemes are now starting to get built out as well. So a really interesting time for the sector.
And Charlie, it is quite interesting. You mentioned so many topics here. We can spend all day, but regarding the business case, because at the end, that's the critical point here. We need to make the proper analysis to identify what is the country conditions, and based on those, you can choose hydrogen or sun power, hydropower, or wind power. But in your experience, which you consider got the fastest ROI?
Well, I suppose that you'd look at a detached viewpoint, wouldn't you, like the investors do? What they have seen is a remarkable reduction in the cost of offshore wind. I was with a major European utility with a massive pipeline of projects, and we said it was impossible to get wind below $100 per megawatt hour. The last leasing round in the UK was under 40. So it was under half of what we as sector leaders said was impossible. So that raised eyebrows and more, and led to encouragement from investors. It also meant that any support that the government gave to offshore wind went a long way. And to be honest, you could argue that the base price has been superseded, and that some of these projects are paying back the UK Treasury, which always goes down well. The second trend, I would say, is probably a similar trend with the cost of electrolyzers, which have also fallen dramatically. So whereas we knew 10, 15 years ago that there was a good mix between wind and hydrogen, we couldn't make it work, not from an economic point of view, but I suppose the scale that offshore wind brings. We're talking about 11 gigawatts, and that's going to be quadrupled and more in the UK in the next 8 years, and other countries as well. So the ramp up, the scale, the economies of scale, and the integration between the wind, the business case regarding shedding, the grid alignment, and the cost falling, and innovation continuing, lead to a very favourable, at least in theory, backdrop to where we are at the moment.
And Charlie, we got colleagues probably watching this session from Latin America, the US, Europe, Asia. Have you noticed some different things?
Yeah. There are certainly nuances out there. Obviously, there are the colours of hydrogen, which, if you come from a renewable background, you might want to favour green hydrogen. Why wouldn't you? Electrolysis, it's the splitting of water by electricity, works very well with wind and other renewable technologies. But there are other ways of getting hydrogen. There's blue hydrogen, which is a steam methane reforming that works well for oil and gas companies that have got reservoirs and depleted assets, decommissioning costs to face, want to put a circular argument forward. And I think there's certainly a place for blue hydrogen. Even elements of what you might call turquoise, which might be a kind of energy from waste hydrogen. It can be made from a very high temperature pyrolysis method. But I've been involved with schemes involving waste plastic, which is abundant in the world and certainly in the UK, to put that through a pyrolysis project and get clean industrial grade hydrogen from that. So I think there's a place for all of those. I've even come across countries wanting to produce what you might call grey or black hydrogen, fossil derived hydrogen. That's more difficult, I think. I think it's less obvious as to why you might want to go down that. Having said that, if you've got 200 years of coal and no other resource, I can see why they might be tempted to look down those routes. But I think they might find it difficult to find a route to market for that product.
Yeah, fully agree with you. And it's quite really interesting because at the end is how can we get the best out, of all the solutions available at the moment. But then that lead me to my next question. So, yeah, we have seen in the market that full electric solutions are, so to say, proven now, I may say. But most of the colleagues in the industry are also keeping an eye into, for example, hydrogen, as I just discussed with you. So any thoughts on about the state of this type of solution?
Yeah, you would always, whenever you go to board level, you'd also always look at the options available. So if you were looking at the hydrogen economy, for example, you just mentioned, you might want to look at ammonia as a part of that. You might want to look at e-methanol or the kind of alternatives that are potentially out there with a green option in some of them as well. The greener options tend to be expensive, but once you scale, I think there's a consensus that if you scale, you can reduce the cost quite dramatically. So, of course, you would always look at all options, especially if you've got a net zero agenda. We've signed up to that in the UK. I know the EU has. Some cities have signed up to a much more aggressive form of net zero by 2030, 100 cities. So it depends on what works for the country, whether they want to be a leader, whether they want to align their future prosperity with that leadership. And of course, that might be underpinned by some kind of support and indeed possibly a carbon tax. Countries are looking at whether they should penalise polluters. If you do have techniques to make power that are not clean, does it align with your values and should you penalise it? And I'm sure that whether you would use the carbon tax to fund the support that some of the schemes will certainly need in the early days, I don't know, that's out of my hands, but I know the discussions are ongoing. So it's a very interesting scenario where hydrogen is certainly part of the mix, but there are other elements. I think the surprising thing about hydrogen is that it's got such an impetus. Hydrogen roadmaps, strategies, you name it. There's one almost being published every week. A new entrants coming into the market. People with no real history. I'm doing a thing at the embassy in Paris on the 18th, and that is Namibia. Wants to look at the green hydrogen economy and its role for Namibia. And no disrespect to Namibia, but I'm not sure of how much of an energy producer that country has been historically. So it's a real eye-opener when countries start to say, well, there's an opportunity there for us, let's at least explore it. And that's what's happening now.
Yeah, Charlie, when it comes to the challenges, especially for example, on the electric solutions, yes, you need to make an investment, especially on the grid, to support the peaks when handling, for example, a full electric fleet. We hear quite a lot when we talk about hydrogen, the challenges to transport hydrogen, to storage hydrogen, the whole platform you need to keep all the safety requirements. Could you share a little bit more about the pros and cons here?
Yeah, with regard to the peaks and troughs, you're talking about things like spinning reserves and things like that have often been fossil based. But I think there's some interesting innovation coming around fuel cells and flow batteries and even smart use of aggregated car batteries. If you've got 1 million car batteries in the UK, I'm not sure we've got that yet, but we might have in a couple of years. And if you put some of them two-way, then there's some really smart Internet of Things options to manage that in an effective way, rather than just throwing resource at things that may become stranded assets in certain scenarios. So that's one solution to do what we're already doing much, much smarter. We're not in the same room, sadly, at the moment, Christopher, yet we're having a conversation. That is because of technological advances. Who would have thought in the last couple of years with lockdown that we could keep going? One of the reasons is because of the tech, isn't it? We're all familiar with Teams and Zoom now. I'm not sure that was the case 3 years ago. So the tech, we've seen advances in drones and unmanned aerial vehicles, undersea versions of those, sensor testing for the safety of hydrogen. Yes, you can't see it, you can't smell it, but you can put something in. You can put remote monitoring in as well. We're doing it for electricity grids already, sending unmanned aerial vehicles up and down the networks. You put pulses through, you put heuristics through, algorithms through, and you can be very, very smart and ensure that your new way of doing things is not the same as the old way. Yes, it might be a bit more remote and a little bit less kind of labour intensive, sadly, in certain situations, but the solutions will present themselves and are presenting themselves.
Great. Yeah, that's a reality now. We need to keep an eye on all these types of technology.
It's all part of the bigger picture, isn't it? You've got the Internet of Things out there, you've got pulses, you've got sensors, and they're improving all the time. You've got 5G, but you can have 6G. That allows remarkable, if you think from a port environment, the simultaneous operations and the amount of smart things that you can do because the technology allows you to do it. And a lot of things can be done perhaps remotely that couldn't be done before. So there's some really good advances that can enable us to keep the cost down and keep the business case sharp keep innovation moving as well for the sector.
And Charlie, how do you foresee the use of the hydrogen technology? Do you think this is something like we'll see more and more in the next 5 years?
Yes, it's already happening. Yeah, I think you'll start with where it's already used. So you might say it's already used in refineries. It's an industrial gas. So you certainly replace the grey with the blue and then the green. Then you would look at your key sectors. They might involve, if you're in Rotterdam, you might look at shipping, you might look at logistics, you might look at locomotives for railways, you might look at the operations for the vehicles. You might look at some of the forklifts going around the site, the transporters, all aspects of the port operations itself, and the integrated economy as well. What about the taxis going to Rotterdam? What about the trains going to it? All of those kind of things.
Yeah, fully agree with you. And Charlie, now to wrap up the session here, what will be your key message for colleagues worldwide trying to become greener, trying to evaluate different technologies to not only achieve operational targets, but also environmental and financial targets?
Yeah. My message will be it's hard, it's a hard slog. It's not, there's a lot of noise around hydrogen at the moment. A lot of it will fall away. It won't be 100% success, but it certainly won't be 100% failure. So some will come through, and let's hope that they come through in a good way. It's the prize. We mentioned the pressing nature of climate change. We've got to try it and address it, haven't we? Hydrogen, at least, is a tool towards that. So you would want to progress it as a tool, not to be blinkered. There are other solutions possibly that might synergize with it. There might be sister technologies, and if it helps us move to net zero, then at least let's try it. So it's not just hydrogen, far from it. But I think it's a good, a Swiss Army knife. I've got a far better knife than the pathetic little knife on my Swiss Army knife, and that's for the corkscrew. But if I wanted something that was a really good tool that could do a lot of things, I think hydrogen would be that Swiss Army knife. And it's a really interesting tool that can enable you to do a lot of things, and some of it quite quickly as well.
Yeah, I really like this approach, like, keeping the business case aligned with the exact, so to say, permutation between the different resources you can figure out to make it work. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I think if you're going to be serious, it's got to get the confidence of investors, hasn't it? So if it doesn't get that, then it's going to go nowhere.
Yeah, fully agree with you, Charlie. So really appreciate your time, Charlie. You're always welcome to join these sessions. It's always good to hear what is going on out in not only in the shipping and logistic industry, but also in other industries. And you're always welcome to join these sessions.
Well, that's very kind, and thank you very much. Thank you, listeners, and thank you, Christopher.
Thanks, Charlie.